My beloved child, don't skip. Listen carefully, because this fictional story begins with a single question that no one in the room expected would change the entire conversation. Stay until the very end, because what started as an ordinary gathering slowly became a moment of honesty, reflection, and unexpected courage. This is not a prediction about your life or your future. It is an inspirational story about facing difficult questions, remaining true to your values, and discovering the quiet strength that comes from speaking with sincerity. The evening had begun like so many others. Friends and family gathered around a table, sharing stories, laughter, and memories from years gone by. The atmosphere felt warm and comfortable, and no one imagined that one simple question would suddenly change the mood. As conversations drifted from work to travel, from childhood memories to hopes for the future, someone smiled and asked, if the person you once cared deeply about never returned, would you marry someone else? The room became quieter. At first, it sounded like an ordinary question, but everyone sensed it carried much deeper meaning. The person at the center of this fictional story did not answer immediately. Instead, they paused, reflecting on everything they had learned through seasons of joy, disappointment, hope, and uncertainty. They knew there was no perfect answer that would satisfy everyone listening. They also knew that honesty sometimes requires courage, especially when the truth is deeply personal. Rather than rushing to respond, they chose to speak thoughtfully, understanding that every word carried weight. Listen carefully, because this is where the story begins to change. They calmly explained that life is not simply about choosing between one future or another. It is about becoming someone who lives with integrity, kindness, and respect regardless of what tomorrow holds. They shared that meaningful relationships cannot be built on pressure, fear, or expectations from other people. Instead, they grow through mutual trust, open communication, compassion, and shared values. Their answer surprised everyone. Not because it was dramatic, but because it reflected maturity and genuine self-awareness. For a few moments, the room remained completely silent. Some people expected a quick yes or no. Instead, they heard someone speak about patience, personal growth, and the importance of making life-changing decisions with wisdom rather than impulse. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was thoughtful. Each person present found themselves reflecting on their own choices, realizing that lasting happiness is not found by rushing toward answers but by becoming the kind of person who can build healthy, respectful relationships. Don't skip this part, because the emotional turning point quietly unfolds here. Later that evening, after the gathering had ended, the person walked home beneath a sky filled with stars. They realized that the question they had been asked was far less important than the answer they had discovered within themselves. They no longer felt pressured to meet anyone else's expectations. Instead, they chose to live according to principles that would remain steady no matter how circumstances changed. That quiet confidence brought a peace they had not experienced for a very long time. My beloved child, this fictional story reminds us that some of life's most important moments begin with ordinary conversations. A single question can encourage deep reflection. A thoughtful answer can inspire unexpected growth. And sometimes, the greatest victory is not convincing others that you are right, it is knowing you have remained faithful to honesty, humility, and compassion. As the night gave way to a new sunrise, the story quietly opened the door to another chapter, one filled with hope, wisdom, and the courage to keep moving forward with integrity, whatever the future might hold. My beloved child, don't skip this chapter, because the silence that filled the room that evening continued echoing long after everyone had gone home. Listen carefully, because in this fictional story, it was not only the question that stayed in everyone's mind. It was the thoughtful answer that refused to be forgotten. The people who had been sitting around the table found themselves replaying every word they had heard. Some expected certainty. Others expected hesitation. Instead, they witnessed someone choosing honesty over pressure and wisdom over impulse. That quiet moment became unforgettable, not because it was loud, but because it revealed the strength of a heart that had learned to value integrity above appearances. As the days passed, the person in this story continued reflecting on that conversation. They realized the question had challenged them in ways they had never expected. It had forced them to examine not only what they wanted for the future but also the kind of person they wanted to become. They understood that meaningful relationships cannot be built by rushing important decisions or by trying to satisfy the expectations of everyone else. Instead, they require patience, mutual respect, clear communication, and a willingness to continue growing together. That realization brought a calm confidence that no outside opinion could take away. Meanwhile, the friends who had been present at the gathering began seeing subtle changes in the person they had questioned. There was a new sense of peace in the way they spoke. They no longer felt the need to explain every decision or defend every hope. They simply lived according to the values they believed in. Their kindness remained steady, their words remained thoughtful, and their actions reflected consistency rather than emotion alone. People quietly noticed that genuine confidence does not seek constant approval, it grows from living honestly, even when others may not fully understand. Don't skip this part, because the story reaches another meaningful turning point. One evening, while taking a peaceful walk beneath a sky filled with stars, the person smiled as they reflected on everything that had changed within them. They realized that the greatest answer they had given that night was not spoken aloud. It was the decision to stop allowing fear, outside expectations, or imagined futures to control the present. They had chosen to trust the process of becoming wiser, kinder, and more patient with every passing season. That quiet decision became the beginning of a completely new chapter in their life. Listen carefully, my beloved child, because this fictional story carries a lesson that reaches beyond its characters. Sometimes life asks difficult questions, not because it expects immediate answers, but because those questions reveal what truly matters in our hearts. They encourage us to examine our values, strengthen our character, and choose integrity over convenience. Every difficult conversation becomes an opportunity to grow. Every season of uncertainty becomes an invitation to practice hope. Every challenge becomes another step toward becoming someone capable of building healthy, lasting, and meaningful relationships rooted in trust and respect. As another sunrise painted the horizon with warm shades of gold, the person stepped into a new day with quiet gratitude. They no longer worried about proving anything to anyone. They understood that the future would unfold one day at a time, and that the best preparation for tomorrow was to live today with honesty, compassion, humility, and courage. Their journey was far from over, but they now walked forward with peaceful confidence, knowing that every chapter ahead would be shaped not by fear or pressure, but by the faithful choices they made each day. And somewhere beyond the next sunrise, another beautiful chapter of this fictional story was already waiting to begin. My beloved child, don't skip this chapter, because the answer given that evening continued touching hearts long after the conversation had ended. Listen carefully, because in this fictional story, no one expected a simple question to become the beginning of such profound reflection. The silence that followed was not created by shock alone. It was created because everyone present recognized genuine sincerity when they heard it. Some quietly wondered how they themselves would have answered such a difficult question. Others found themselves thinking about the relationships they had taken for granted and the conversations they had postponed. Without realizing it, one honest response had inspired an entire room to look inward. The person at the center of the story returned home that night carrying an unusual sense of peace. They stood beside the window, watching the stars appear one by one across the quiet sky. Instead of replaying the opinions of everyone around them, they reflected on the journey that had shaped their heart. Every disappointment had taught patience. Every misunderstanding had strengthened empathy. Every season of waiting had quietly refined their character. They finally understood that true confidence is not found in having every answer. It is found in knowing that your choices are guided by honesty, compassion, and integrity, regardless of how others may respond. As another morning arrived, life continued in ordinary ways, yet everything felt different. The conversations were the same, the streets looked familiar, and the responsibilities remained unchanged, but the person noticed a calm they had never experienced before. They no longer felt pressured to rush toward the future or trapped by memories of the past. Instead, they embraced each day as an opportunity to become wiser, more patient, and more thoughtful. They realized that meaningful relationships are not built in a single dramatic moment. They are built through daily acts of kindness, respectful communication, and the willingness to keep growing through every season of life. Don't skip this part, because the emotional heart of this chapter quietly unfolds here. A close friend who had been present during that unforgettable conversation reached out a few days later. They admitted that the answer they had heard had challenged the way they viewed commitment, trust, and personal growth. It was not because the words were perfect, but because they were sincere. That conversation became the beginning of many meaningful discussions about forgiveness, resilience, and the importance of making life decisions based on values rather than pressure. The person realized that honesty has a remarkable way of encouraging others to become more honest as well. Listen carefully, because this fictional story now shares another important truth. Every difficult question life asks carries within it an opportunity to grow. Sometimes the greatest gift is not finding the easiest answer but discovering the principles that guide every answer. Kindness during disagreement. Patience during uncertainty. Respect during misunderstanding. Humility during success. Those qualities became the foundation upon which every future decision would rest. They understood that while circumstances may change, character remains one of life's greatest treasures. As the evening sun slowly disappeared beyond the horizon, filling the sky with warm shades of gold and crimson, the person smiled with quiet gratitude. They no longer wondered whether others approved of every choice they made. Instead, they found peace in knowing they had remained faithful to the values that mattered most. The journey ahead still contained mysteries, unexpected turns, and opportunities for growth, but none of those possibilities created fear anymore. They inspired hope. They inspired courage. They inspired a renewed commitment to live each day with honesty, compassion, and unwavering integrity. My beloved child, don't skip these closing words, because they lead directly into the next chapter of this fictional journey. Sometimes the most unforgettable moments in life begin with a simple question asked in an ordinary room. Yet the answer, when spoken from a sincere heart, has the power to inspire far beyond the moment itself. As another sunrise prepared to welcome a brand new day, the person stepped forward with confidence, knowing that the future would not be shaped by fear, expectations, or uncertainty, but by the faithful choices they continued making one day at a time. And somewhere beyond tomorrow, another meaningful chapter was already waiting to be written. My beloved child, don't skip this chapter, because in this fictional story the silence from that unforgettable evening began creating changes no one expected. Listen carefully, because sometimes the most powerful words are not the ones spoken in the moment, they are the ones that continue echoing in the heart long after the conversation has ended. The person who had answered that difficult question woke the next morning with an unusual sense of peace. For the first time in a long while, they were not worried about whether everyone agreed with them. They found comfort in knowing they had remained honest. They had spoken with respect instead of emotion, wisdom instead of pressure, and kindness instead of fear. That quiet confidence became the beginning of a completely different season in their life. As the days slowly unfolded, they noticed that people around them began treating them differently. Friends who had once offered quick opinions now asked thoughtful questions. Family members who had expected simple answers now understood that life is rarely simple. The conversation from that evening had reminded everyone that the biggest decisions cannot be made to satisfy other people's expectations. They must be made with patience, honesty, and a heart willing to accept responsibility for the future. The person realized that genuine maturity is not measured by how quickly someone answers difficult questions, but by how thoughtfully they live after answering them. Meanwhile, another individual who had quietly listened that night found themselves reflecting on the conversation again and again. They realized they had spent too much of their own life making decisions based on fear of disappointing others instead of staying true to their values. That realization inspired them to begin changing their own path. They started repairing broken friendships, apologizing where necessary, expressing gratitude more often, and choosing compassion instead of resentment. Without intending to, the honest answer they had heard became the spark that encouraged growth in more than one life. Don't skip this part, because the emotional turning point of this fictional story quietly arrives here. One peaceful evening, while sitting alone beneath a sky filled with stars, the person reflected on everything that had happened since that unforgettable question. They smiled, realizing that they no longer feared the future the way they once had. They understood that life would always include uncertainty, but uncertainty no longer felt like an enemy. It became an invitation to trust their character, their principles, and the lessons they had gained through every difficult season. That realization brought a peace no outside approval could ever replace. Listen carefully, because this fictional story now shares one of its deepest truths. Lasting relationships are never built on dramatic promises alone. They are built through ordinary days filled with extraordinary consistency. A promise faithfully kept. A difficult conversation handled with respect. A disagreement approached with patience. A mistake followed by sincere accountability. Those quiet acts become stronger than any grand declaration because they create trust one day at a time. The person in this story finally understood that genuine love is measured less by impressive words and more by faithful actions repeated throughout every season of life. As another beautiful sunrise painted the horizon with shades of gold and blue, they stepped into the new day carrying gratitude instead of anxiety. They no longer searched for perfect certainty before taking the next step. They simply committed themselves to living with honesty, humility, kindness, and courage wherever the journey might lead. Every challenge became another opportunity to grow. Every blessing became another reason to remain thankful. Every conversation became another chance to strengthen trust. And with every step forward, they realized that the greatest chapters of this fictional story were not written by chance, they were written through faithful choices made one day at a time. My beloved child, don't skip these final words, because they lead directly into the next chapter. Sometimes a single question changes far more than one conversation. Sometimes it changes the way a person sees themselves, the way they treat others, and the way they approach the future. The journey was far from over, but the heart that once carried uncertainty now carried quiet confidence. And as the morning light stretched across the path ahead, they walked forward without fear, knowing that the strongest foundations are always built with truth, patience, compassion, and unwavering integrity. My beloved child, don't skip this chapter, because in this fictional story, what happened after that unforgettable conversation became even more meaningful than the conversation itself. Listen carefully, because life has a remarkable way of revealing the true value of our choices over time. Days turned into weeks, and the person who had answered with such quiet honesty began noticing something unexpected. They no longer carried the burden of trying to explain themselves to everyone around them. Instead, they focused on becoming someone whose actions spoke louder than words. Every promise they made, they kept. Every conversation they entered, they approached with respect. Every challenge they faced became another opportunity to choose patience over frustration and wisdom over impulse. Slowly, the peace they had found within themselves began inspiring those around them. The people who had witnessed that moment of silence often found themselves remembering it. Some admitted that they had judged too quickly. Others realized they had been making important life decisions based more on fear than conviction. Quiet conversations began taking place long after the gathering had ended. Friends spoke more openly about forgiveness. Families discussed the importance of trust and honest communication. The simple question asked that evening had unexpectedly encouraged everyone to reflect on what truly matters. It reminded them that meaningful relationships are not built by perfect circumstances but by people who consistently choose integrity, compassion, and understanding. Meanwhile, the person at the center of this fictional story continued growing in ways that were not immediately visible. Each morning became another opportunity to strengthen their character. They learned that real confidence does not come from receiving approval from others. It comes from living according to values that remain steady through every season of life. They became slower to react in moments of disagreement, quicker to offer grace when mistakes were made, and more willing to listen before speaking. These quiet changes gradually transformed not only their relationships but also the way they viewed themselves. They no longer measured success by what they possessed or by what others expected. They measured success by whether they had acted with kindness, honesty, humility, and courage. Don't skip this part, because the emotional heart of this chapter quietly unfolds beneath an ordinary evening sky. While walking through a peaceful park at sunset, they paused to reflect on the road behind them. They remembered the uncertainty they once carried, the sleepless nights filled with endless questions, and the fear that had once convinced them to remain silent. Looking back, they realized those difficult seasons had never been meant to defeat them. They had prepared them. Every disappointment had taught resilience. Every unanswered question had deepened wisdom. Every challenge had strengthened the heart. For the first time, they felt genuine gratitude not only for the joyful chapters but also for the difficult ones that had quietly shaped their character. Listen carefully, because this fictional story now reaches one of its deepest realizations. They discovered that true commitment is not merely about the future. It begins with the way a person lives today. It is reflected in keeping one's word, showing respect during disagreement, remaining patient during uncertainty, and choosing compassion even when emotions become difficult. These daily choices may seem small, yet together they create the strongest foundation any relationship can stand upon. They understood that lasting love is never built in a single extraordinary moment. It is built through thousands of ordinary moments lived with extraordinary faithfulness. As dawn arrived once again, filling the horizon with warm golden light, the person welcomed another new beginning with a grateful heart. They no longer feared what tomorrow might bring because they trusted the values guiding their steps. Whatever opportunities awaited, they would meet them with honesty. Whatever challenges appeared, they would face them with courage. Whatever relationships entered their life, they would nurture them with kindness, patience, and mutual respect. And as they continued walking toward the light of a brand new day, they realized that the greatest reward was not reaching a destination quickly, it was becoming the kind of person capable of bringing peace, hope, and encouragement wherever the journey might lead. My beloved child, don't skip these final lines, because they prepare the way for the next chapter. Every sunrise now felt like a fresh invitation. Every conversation became another chance to strengthen trust. Every challenge became another lesson in resilience. The story was still unfolding, but one truth had become beautifully clear: a heart guided by honesty, compassion, and unwavering integrity will never walk alone for long. The road ahead remained unwritten. My beloved child, don't skip these final words, because every chapter of this fictional story has been leading to this moment. Listen carefully, because the question that once filled an entire room with silence was never really about whether someone would marry someone else. It became a moment that encouraged everyone present to think more deeply about commitment, honesty, and the kind of life they truly wanted to build. The silence was powerful because it gave every heart the opportunity to reflect. Sometimes the greatest answers are not the loudest ones. Sometimes they arrive quietly, leaving behind wisdom that continues growing long after the conversation has ended. As the months passed, life continued moving forward, just as it always does. New opportunities appeared. Unexpected challenges came and went. Seasons changed, and so did the people in this story. Yet one thing remained constant: the lessons they had learned never left them. They became more patient during disagreements, more grateful for ordinary moments, quicker to forgive mistakes, and more willing to listen before speaking. They discovered that meaningful relationships are not sustained by excitement alone. They are strengthened through consistency, mutual respect, compassion, and the daily decision to care for one another with sincerity. The person who had answered that unforgettable question no longer wondered whether others approved of every choice they made. Instead, they found peace in living according to their values. They understood that integrity is a quiet companion that stays with us long after applause fades. They no longer feared difficult conversations because they had learned that truth spoken with kindness builds trust rather than division. Their confidence no longer depended upon perfect circumstances. It rested on the knowledge that they were becoming someone whose character would remain steady through every season of life. Don't skip this part, because this is where the deepest realization unfolds. Looking back over every chapter, they finally understood that every delay, every disappointment, every unanswered question, and every difficult conversation had served a purpose. None of it had been wasted. Every challenge had refined their character. Every obstacle had strengthened their resilience. Every season of waiting had taught them patience. They realized that life's greatest blessings are often prepared long before we recognize them, and that becoming the right person is just as important as finding the right people to share life with. Listen carefully, my beloved child, because this fictional story leaves one final lesson behind. Relationships flourish where trust is protected, honesty is practiced, forgiveness is offered, and kindness becomes a daily habit. Grand promises may inspire for a moment, but faithful actions repeated day after day create something far stronger and more lasting. The future can never be controlled completely, but the choices we make each day can shape the kind of future we are preparing ourselves to enter. That truth filled their heart with lasting peace. As another sunrise painted the sky with brilliant shades of gold and blue, the people in this story stepped into a new season with grateful hearts. They no longer rushed toward tomorrow, nor did they remain trapped by yesterday. They embraced each day as a gift and opportunity to love more generously, forgive more freely, serve more humbly, and grow more faithfully. They understood that happiness is not found in avoiding every storm but in learning to walk through every season with courage, compassion, and hope. My beloved child, remember these final words. Every ending carries the possibility of a new beginning. Every lesson has the power to shape a wiser tomorrow. Every act of kindness leaves a mark that lasts longer than we often realize. As this fictional story reaches its final page, the room that was once filled with silence is now filled with understanding, gratitude, and hope. The journey did not end with a single answer, it continued through countless faithful choices that followed. And as the morning light stretched across the path ahead, the travelers smiled and walked forward without fear. They carried no bitterness from the past, no regret over unanswered questions, and no need to force the future to unfold before its time. Instead, they carried wisdom earned through experience, courage strengthened by challenges, and hearts committed to living with honesty and compassion. One story had come to a peaceful close, but another beautiful chapter had already begun. And with every step they took, they discovered that the most meaningful endings are simply the first pages of a brighter tomorrow, written one day at a time with hope, integrity, and enduring love.